Okay. Professor Swaran Singh, is it a thaw or a management of a frozen conflict? Then I'll move to the next part of the conversation, sir.
I think clearly visas have been an important instrument that India has repeatedly used in indicating displeasure or resuming of a rapprochement. More recently, last 25 years or so, when from early 2000s, trade and tourism expanded between these two countries, the visas numbers grew up much faster. And in that context, Prime Minister, in a speech in Tsinghua University, I think in May of 2015, had unilaterally announced granting e-visas to Chinese. And the peak period for granting visas to Chinese was 2019, when again India has made a unilateral liberalization proposal of saying e-visas for tourism, for medical, for conferences, for business, and for longer periods from 1 year to 5 years. So India has repeatedly utilized this visa as an instrument of expressing the kind of relationship it wants with Chinese. And in that context, we are noticing that after the September meeting of Prime Minister Modi with the Chinese President in Tianjin, there has been resumption of flights, and therefore also now I think again what MEA calls a fully functional granting of visas, both e-visas and hard copies. But there are some issues. For example, recently one Indian citizen born in Arunachal Pradesh traveling from UK to Japan became an issue. So these irritants often don't show up, but there is a cyclical mode that you can see in the entire history of 80 years when visas have become difficult for Chinese to come to India, and when India had made unilateral gestures of this nature.
Okay, absolutely. Professor Swaran Singh, generally people tend to see any movement in the domain of economy or in the domain of people-to-people movement, and attempt is to hyphenate with the pending or an issue which has been kept pending purposefully by China, border. So should we say that that has to be seen separately, not in this light? It's a completely different issue which remains frozen by China purposefully?
I think understandably China believes that they are the stronger party in that asymmetric relationship, and therefore the Chinese perspective on the border is by saying that no single issue should be allowed to hold the entire relationship hostage. India has a very different take on it. India believes that relations cannot be normal as long as border is not
Precisely.
normalized. But when you spoke of $1 trillion of trade surplus in first 11 months for the Chinese,
Yes.
one has to remember there is a nearly $1 trillion deficit when it comes to United States. And these two inordinately large-sized economies, 20 trillion on one side and 28 trillion on the other, they themselves have nearly $300 billion of deficit among themselves. And that's not a very stable situation. That's not a stable reality. And I just want to underline a very important fact from history that you would remember the Opium Wars were results of trade deficit. So it's not a good relationship even for Chinese to have that trade surplus. A balanced trade with most countries is excellent. Otherwise, a persistent, perennial, large-sized deficit leads to desperate measures and leads to suspicions. And I hope that between these large-sized economies, $1 trillion of trade surplus versus trade deficit should not really
Professor
land
Swaran
us.
Singh, is this the reason that the new national security strategy document of the United States of America talks about reviving the Monroe Doctrine, and on Thursday evening, President of the United States said Ukraine war could lead to a larger global conflict? Do you think it's primarily emanating from trade issues which America is facing?
There is no doubt if there is one single issue that has really disturbed the presidency of Donald Trump, it is his concerns about trade deficit. And therefore, he's been trying all kinds of desperate measures to deal with that, using tariff hikes and so on. But when it comes to his revoking of Monroe Doctrine, I think that's going back to saying that American continent is for the United States as sphere of influence. To me, that national security strategy seemed to both take the vision backdated to 200 years and narrow it down to a very specific region, saying that he's no longer very interested in Ukraine war and wants to end it as soon as possible, even with lot of propitiation of President Putin. So in that sense, to me, that document is a reflection of, I think, a very dated mindset rather than United States reasserting its global leadership to stand against Chinese challenge. Chinese would love to see that United States starts deserting global responsibilities and shrink itself to, at best, Caribbean, Latin America. That's not again a good sign for global stability. A more balanced geopolitics, a more balanced economic relationships, I think, is what one aspires to see to bring prosperity to everybody. But here it seems the Chinese are continuously trying to take that space of global leadership, and in that sense, constant desertion of global responsibilities and walking away from responsibilities that has sustained United States as global leader is perhaps again is a sign of instability, and the kind of rapid pace of seeking some kind of hammering out of a ceasefire, end of war in Ukraine. It seems also very externally driven, and in that sense, I hope it will be sustainable on the ground.
So thank you, Professor Swarin. You wanted to say something, sir?
And let me say that I think it will be self-delusional to say that there is no asymmetry. What we export to China is $14 billion compared to the trade of $136 billion. Within that, what we export maximum, 22% of our exports is iron ore. Asymmetry is up in the face, 6 times economy, 4 times defense budget, military modernization. We have to be realistic in looking at what China is doing in terms of expanding technology. It's making technology dependencies around the world, infrastructure dependencies around the world. India has its own advantages of Western world willing to kind of stand by us to compete with China. I'm not saying we have no disadvantages. And last 10 seconds, asymmetry is not simple weak and strong relationship. In asymmetric relationships, weaker powers also have their unique strengths which can really be utilized.
Mr. Swarin Singh, you made a point that China thinks that it is more powerful than India. If you look at the economy, if you look at its army, yes, they are bigger size-wise. But there's a series of articles which New York Times has started. They are producing those articles, and the articles are written by the New York Times editorial board. And I think they are being dropped every 48 hours. I have read 2 of them, and 2 things stuck. The first was a review of the overmatched review, which was prepared for the Biden administration and subsequently shared with the Trump administration. And I think the Pete Hegseth was the one who gave the presentation. Every time they did a sort of a simulation of military simulation between China and America in terms of a war. In that simulation, America lost all the times. And they said they had built redundancy after redundancy after redundancy, and I'm quoting NYT editorial board, not my original words. The second article that came out, they had given a projection of the military. By 2030, in every naval aspect, the Chinese Navy will be far bigger than the American Navy. And the American power was projected through their Navy in this century. Not through aircraft, not through the military, by their Navy. And the article argued that all they were building today are the dud aircraft carriers, $12 billion each, like Gerald Ford, which they have deployed in Venezuela. And whereas the Chinese are building all sorts of cheap missiles, all sorts of cheap drones, which can take the entire armada down. In that context, what should be our priority? What should be our concern? And Ambassador Mukherjee, the same question to you once Professor Swarin Singh tackles this question. With this asymmetry, which will come into existence, breathing right in front of us, what are the choices we must exercise?
First of all, I am not even thinking that there is a possibility of a direct war between the United States and China. Second, all likely scenarios that projections are showing could be a war in Taiwan Straits. So China is not going all the way to fight United States in its own periphery. United States will be likely to come here. So that is a very complex picture, and neither China has won any clear war in its history, nor the United States in last 80 years. But what should India do in such an unstable situation is to focus on indigenization and become much more independent in its defense production. India has been trying to do that, particularly working together with Russia for last 20-25 years now. Because as India emerges as a major economy, and we are hoping and we are aiming that we'll reach about $30 trillion economy by 2047, the path to that goal to be achieved will be full of confrontations and tensions with all major powers that are, who will not be comfortable to make space for India, and therefore continuously our dependence, especially in critical technologies, defense technologies, on any of these could become a limitation of India. And I think that we are noticing increasingly that Ministry of Defense perhaps has already listed about 800 items that must be produced within the country. So increasing focus on indigenization, and until we reach there, diversification for defense technology is what India
But
should be
Professor
focusing.
Swaran Singh, that's where the challenge is. You know,
We're collecting donations for the Event Foundation, which supports humanitarian projects.